Hi, fifth graders. I am going to read 2 more chapters of Abel's Island for you. I am on chapter 5. Hopefully I won't knock this little contraption down where I've got my phone sitting on. Okay, chapter 5. He sat on a stone, staining it with his wetness. He pulled at his snout and chewed his lips. He was beginning to comprehend the awkwardness of his position. He was marooned on an island, nowhere near civilization, as far as he could tell, and if he was going to get off, it must be by his own devices. But he was obviously not going to cross that river in any boat that he could put together out of the available materials. He had worked so quickly that it was still only mid-afternoon. He returned to the birch tree, thoughtfully munching on mushrooms along the way. He knew which ones were safe. He had studied mushrooms in Sori's botany class at home, and he and Amanda had picked them in the forest. He was hungrier than he had realized. Abel posed this question to himself. Other than by swimming or on boats, how do rivers get crossed? By tunnels and bridges, of course. Could he tunnel under that river with his paws, his penknife, and a homemade wooden shovel, perhaps? No pickaxe, no crowbar, no wheelbarrow or wagon, not even a pail to carry out the earth and rocks. He would have to start far back from the shore so as not to have to carry the diggings out of too vertical a shaft, and he would have to burrow way down deep where it was almost as hard as a rock, if indeed it wasn't rock itself. And how could he be sure that he was tunneling well under the riverbed? What if the river flooded his tunnel? Or if the tunnel simply collapsed on him? What a way that would be for the descendant of an ancient and noble family to die. Pressed out of existence in mundane mud, and no one even knowing what had happened to him or where. Only he himself would know. And just for a second at that. Nah, the tunnel idea was out. Here is a picture of Abel, just kind of sitting and thinking, trying to figure out another way to get across that river. He would have to construct a bridge of some sort. He was intelligent and had imagination. Something would surely occur to him. The situation was by no means hopeless. However, he was clearly not leaving the island this day, so he decided to explore it. His birch tree was situated near the upper end of the island, which he had already hastily crossed. He now carefully walked its length. It was a typical piece of the temperate zone, with familiar kinds of rocks, trees, bushes, brambles, grass, and other plants. It was gravelly near the water, rockiest at the lower end, and from a mouse's point of view, hilly. Abel estimated the island to be about 12,000 taels long, 5,000 taels wide. What most felt like home in this strange place full of familiar objects was the birch tree. He had already slept in it twice. Returning there, he heard bird song and saw birds, but they showed no interest in him, and he felt no hope of communicating with them. They were wild, and he was civilized. He knew that certain pigeons could be taught to carry messages, and he had heard the woeful sounds of a mourning dove, but that was the wrong kind of pigeon. Though he was having a most extraordinary experience, Abel was bored. It was not an adventure of his choosing. It had been foisted upon him, and that he resented. He even began to dislike his friends back home for lacking the powers of logic to puzzle out where he was so they could come to his rescue. He wished to be in his own home with his loving wife, surrounded by the books that he liked to browse in, and by his paintings and his elegant possessions, and dressed in neat, modern clothing, comfortable in a stuffed chair. He wouldn't even mind being bored there, staring at the patterns in the wallpaper, He was fed up with this stupid, pointless island. But the stupid island was where he was going to spend that night, at least, in soiled clothing that were beginning to smell musty. What if he had to stay longer than this night? Well, food would be no problem. The island abounded with edible plants, many of which he recognized from illustrations in his encyclopedia. And there were insects that he could eat if it came to that choice, or starving. He could continue to sleep in the birch tree where, if not completely protected, he had the advantage of a high spot, the upper hand in case of a conflict. For dinner, he ate wild carrots, carefully scraped with his knife. Then, with his paws folded across his belly, where the nourishment was being extracted from the carrots, he sat under his birch in the opal glow of the waning day and took stock of his resources. He had a shirt, trousers, socks, shoes, underwear, a necktie, and suspenders. His jacket had gone with the smashed sailboat, and his handkerchief with the catamaran. In his pockets, he had the stub of a pencil, a small scratch pad, quite damp, a few coins, the keys to his house, and his penknife. And of course, there was Amanda's scarf. He pressed it to his face. In spite of all the washings it had been through, its threads still held Amanda's dear scent. Abel fought off a wave of self-pity. Only when he considered the unhappiness that he was causing Amanda, his family, his friends, did he finally allow himself some hot tears. Despair was darkening his spirit. Deep down, where truth dwells, he wasn't at all sure he'd be getting off the island soon. He rested against his tree and gazed at the river, just being itself, burbling along. The river was where it ought to be. Abel was not. He felt out of place. When it grew dark, he climbed to the top of his tree and laid down in the crook of the branch, hugging Amanda's scarf. He was suddenly thrilled to see his private personal star arise in the east. This was a particular star that his nanny had chosen for him when he was a child. As a child, he would sometimes talk to this star, but only when he was his most serious, real self, and not being any sort of a show-off or a clown. As he grew up, the practice had somehow worn off. He looked up at his old friend the star as if to say, "You see my predicament?" And the star seemed to respond, "I see." Abel next put this question, "Well, what shall I do?" The star seemed to answer, "You shall do what you shall do." For some reason, this reply strengthened Abel's belief in himself. Sleep gently enfolded him. The constellations proceeded across the hushed heavens as if tiptoeing past the dreaming mouse on his high branch. Abel dreamed of Amanda. Odd, unfinished dreams. And actually, this is a picture of Abel kind of thinking about being at home with his wife, sitting in his chair. This is actually him like sitting there thinking about it by the river. Abel dreamed of Amanda. Odd, unfinished dreams. As the new day dawned, he dreamed that he was falling. There was nothing to get hold of in the awesome void, and he plummeted toward unthinkable pain on the hard ground. Wait, was he really dreaming? Yes, but he was also really falling. Dream and reality were the same. He hit a leafy branch which broke his fall, and he landed in some deep grass and was awake. It sickened him to see the river there in the pale early light. Here's a picture of him dreaming he's falling, but actually falling. Of course, he's got hold of Amanda's scarf. That was the end of chapter 5. So I'm going to stop the video there, and I'll do chapter 6 in just a minute.